Hey kids, it's Mr. Fly here, hope you're well. And welcome back to the channel for a video which I think is going to be quite popular because a lot of people have asked me about this. This video is going to be a comparison of my two favourite retro bikes, two bikes that I actually own and I've owned for a while now. This, the Triumph Speed Twin, now called the Speed Twin 1200, and my brand new Kawasaki Z900 RS. I've owned both the bikes for a little while now, I've got to know them well. As far as I'm concerned, these two bikes are the front runners in the retro style bike race, if you like. Out of all the retro bikes that I've ridden, these are my two favourites, and that is why I own them. Anyway, stick around and stay tuned. I'll tell you how they compare from an owner's perspective. So if you're interested in a full review of either of these bikes, then check out other videos on my channel. I've got playlists on each of these bikes. They're called something like Living with the Triumph Speed Twin and Living with the Kawasaki Z900 RS. Look at those if you want full details of specifications, what they like to ride, all that sort of detail. This is just going to be a comparison, what it's like comparing directly these two bikes against each other. What I'm going to do is take them out on a little bit of a ride, exactly the same ride, talk about some key things like, what is the comfort like on the thing, what do I think of the instrumentation and controls, how's the handling, all that kind of thing, and then we'll come back to the garage and we'll go through the sort of lessons I've learned since I've been riding these two bikes, and see if we can draw some sort of conclusion about which is the best one. Okay, so I must just say that this is a comparison of my two bikes, as in, like everybody, when you own bikes you do little mods, don't you? So the Speed Twin's got a few modifications made to it, as has the Kawasaki, and as I go through the review I will point those out and talk to you about those, just so we're completely clear about what's what. Because the Triumph Speed Twin is a 2019 model bike, so it's the original, well, the original of this version of the Speed Twin. And I made some changes to the bike. I'll talk about those as we go through the comparison. And my Z900 RS is the SE model, which has the fancy suspension, upgraded brakes, things like that. So I'm not really comparing like with like, and that I'm not comparing the modern day Speed Twin 1200 against the basic Kawasaki Z900 RS. You'll have to kind of read between the lines on that. But these are my two bikes, the ones I've got to work with, so that's what the comparison is going to be about. First, let's talk comfort on the Speed Twin. Well, I would say it's a comfortable place to be because it is an upright riding position. Classic Bonneville. I'm sat a little bit lent forward, but not too much. My feet feel tucked up underneath me a little bit. They're quite high and my legs are at an acute angle. It feels relatively sporty in the lower half of my body, but certainly there's not a lot of weight on the wrist. I'm not lent forward like on a sports bike. Handlebars relatively narrow, but it's a comfortable place to be. The seat on my bike is a custom seat, so I have to think back to what the original seat felt like, and I have to say the original seat was very comfortable on it. It was a little bit thinner than the Kawasaki, but nonetheless a comfortable place to be for a considerable amount of time. So let's talk comfort on the Kawasaki then. How does that feel directly compared to the Triumph, which I've literally just jumped off of, so it's an excellent comparison. Well, this bike feels a lot bigger in every dimension. My legs feel wider spread out, which you may or may not like. Means you can grip the tank quite nicely. The handlebars seem a little bit wider as well. And in terms of the seating position, it's fairly similar from the top half of my body. I'm leant forward slightly, but no real appreciable weight on my wrists. But my legs are a little bit straighter than on the Speed Twin. The Speed Twin feels a little bit more sporty when you do a back-to-back comparison like this. Alright, moving on to the engines then. First, the Speed Twin. Now the Speed Twin is a parallel twin, funnily enough, there's a clue in the title. 270-degree crank, 1200cc, and it is a beautiful unit. It's got loads of shove. If you want to go into details about specification on the engine, check out my previous reviews on the bike. There's loads of videos on this bike on the channel in a playlist called Living with the Triumph Speed Twin, I think. Check those out for those sort of details. But in terms of how it feels, it's just got loads of grunt, and it sounds absolutely epic too. Now, one of the changes I have on the Speed Twin is I've got the Vance & Hines pipes fitted, which on this original bike were a factory extra. Whereas on the modern day bikes, if you buy one today in 2023, that is not an option anymore, which is a shame because they do sound absolutely brilliant and crack and burble a treat. I find the engine really, really nice on here. There's no, given it is a big old twin, there's not really any massive vibrations, anything like that. There's enough to let you know that you're on a motorcycle, but it's pretty smooth. They've done clever stuff with balancer shafts, that sort of thing. It sounds like an old British bike should. And my goodness me, it goes like stink. If you accelerate fast on this, it feels like your arms want to come out the sockets. The engine is an absolute peach on the Triumph. Okay, engine on the Z900 RS then. 4-cylinder unit in line on this. Completely different character to the Speed Twin. And hopefully you can hear that it sounds quite different. Bother, stuck behind a horse box now, with little chance to overtake. So yeah, the engine on here is lovely, but in a different sort of way. It doesn't have as much immediate grunt as the Speed Twin, and you would sort of expect that from a 4-cylinder bike. You have to change gear a lot more on the Kawasaki, but it does sound great. It's got really nice induction noise in here, but it doesn't make such good burbling noises out of the exhaust. The Speed Twin in that Vance & Hines pipes does make good burbling noises. This does it occasionally, but not quite as much. And I really like the way the Speed Twin sounds. I like the way this sounds too, but it's different. I think on balance, I prefer the way the Speed Twin sounds, but I prefer the smoothness of this engine. They're both lovely engines though, just quite different. Gearbox on the Triumph has never ever given me any issues. It's a lovely unit. The clutch on the Triumph, of course, is the Triumph slip assist clutch. It's a nice and light action. I never get forced neutrals. It doesn't jump out a gear. I don't have trouble finding neutral. The gearbox on the Speed Twin, really, really nice. Gearbox on the Kawasaki, perfectly good. I'd say, if anything, it's not quite as good as the Triumph. The clutch is nice and light. I suspect it's a slip assist one on here as well. I don't actually know, but it feels just as light as the Triumph. I haven't had any problems with forced neutrals or anything like that either, so the gearbox is fine. In terms of its operation, I do find the Triumph one just snicks in that a little bit easier. I think the Triumph has got the edge on the gearbox. How about handling? Well, the Speed Twin, you know what, I can't complain. The newer bike does handle better than this one. The newer bike has slightly uprated suspension and different tyres as standard, and definitely does handle better than my Speed Twin. But this particular bike handles fine. The suspension is nice and soft. It soaks up these bumps. The roads around here in the UK at the moment really bumpy and horrible, but this soaks them up a treat. I used to have a Triumph Street Triple, and that nearly used to throw me off the seat on the bumps, as did my old Panigale, but this soaks them up. It's a comfortable ride as far as the suspension is concerned. And the handling is fine. You do have to muscle it around the corners slightly, so I wouldn't say it's particularly agile, but there's absolutely nothing wrong with the handling on the Speed Twin. Handling on the Kawasaki, well, this bike just feels a lot lighter than the Speed Twin, probably just because of the way it carries its weight. I think I don't think there's a lot to choose weight wise between them. I haven't looked the numbers up, I'm just going by how this feels, but I would say this bike feels agile compared to the Triumph, which is kind of planted and you need to sort of muscle around corners. You don't need to do that on the Kawasaki. Caught up with these vehicles again, how annoying. Let me just pull over here for a bit. And of course this SE version of the Z900 RS has the fancy Öhlins suspension, so again, in terms of soaking up bumps and stuff, it's lovely. It's a really plush ride on here. Is it better than the Speed Twin? It's marginal, but I would say yes, it is. I think even I, who's not a particularly expert rider, can tell the difference with this Öhlins rear shock on here. It does feel really, really nice. It means the handling is top notch. Sadly, I've caught up with these vehicles again. Alright, what about controls and instrumentation then? Well, again, this is slightly outrageous because mine aren't standard here. What I've done in terms of instrumentation, it's got these great 2 dials, as the Kawasaki has, as you'll see in a minute, but these have got aftermarket inlaid cards that make them look a bit more classic than it comes with as standard. The standard dials on the Triumph are a bit blingy for my taste, but they are nice. But I just prefer these cards I've inserted. Made a video about installing those if you're interested. But they're nice and clear. They've got these little LCD bits inside which has your odos and clocks and things like that. Instrumentation absolutely top notch. It looks quality. It looks like a fine made watch. Works well. It's got everything you need. I really like the instrumentation on the Speed Twin. And the switchgear as well, nice and simple, classic typical Triumph stuff here. Good quality. It's tactile. You can feel when you've engaged the buttons. It doesn't feel cheap and nasty in any way, and it's very, very easy to use. As far as I'm concerned, the switchgear and the instrumentation on the Speed Twin is top notch, and again, one of the reasons why I bought this bike. I really love it. Right, controls and instrumentation on the Kawasaki, how does that compare with the Triumph? Well, it all looks very nice once again. In terms of the dials, you've got a very similar setup here, and you've got two proper analog dials with an LCD bit in the middle which has got everything you need as well. I really like the way that looks. This is how it comes as standard. It apes the original Kawasaki's of the 70s, or harks back to those. I think it's a lovely presentation and looks good. It's not quite as jewel-like as the Triumph, in that these binnacles are plastic. There's a lot of plastic going on here. It looks good, but when you knock it with your knuckles, it doesn't feel quite as good quality as the Triumph. But I do like the presentation. It looks lovely. And again, just little touches like on the Triumph, you've got where it says Speed Twin embossed on the triple clamp at the top. On here, you've got nothing like that. It'd be nice if it said RS SE or something, wouldn't it? Or Z900 or something there. It doesn't say that. So Kawasaki haven't done anything like that on here, which is a bit of a shame. And then the switchgear on here, I think is a bit flimsy compared to the Triumph. It works perfectly well, but these buttons just aren't quite as quality feeling as the Triumph. But I am clashing at straws here, and I have to say there is nothing wrong with the switchgear, nothing wrong with the display on here. I love what you're looking at. I love how easy it is to use. It's all great. I'm just saying, if anything, the Triumph is perhaps a little bit better, but it's like, you know, if the Triumph is 95%, this is 93%. It's that close. Alright, let's take a look at the styling on the Triumph Speed Twin then. This being the original, well, not original Speed Twin, of course, that came out years ago, but the first of the modern retro versions of it. Made a big play about the fuel tank on here. It's got these hand painted coach lines on here which look really nice. The current version, the 2023 model, doesn't have that paint scheme, but they still look lovely. I think it's a really nice looking bike. Of course, this was designed as a retro from the ground up, so everything about it is nice and neat and tidy. If you look at the engine, look, I like the fact that you can see through the engine. There's not loads of extraneous cables and wires and things. It's nice and tidy at the handlebar end. There's not lots of extra cables and stuff going on there. I think it looks really nice. The paint on it is lustrous, and the build quality on the Triumph is absolutely top notch. They do a really nice job of these, and of course, again, because it's been built ground up as a retro bike, unlike the Kawasaki, which is an adapted Z900, a modern, completely modern bike, this one on the back, the suspension, look, has these twin shocks which again look the part, I think. So yeah, really nice looking bike, the Speed Twin, which is a big part of why I bought it. It looks like a motorcycle should look, and the build quality is top notch. Okay, let's talk styling on the Kawasaki, which I think is an area that absolutely wins. Even though this wasn't built originally as a retro style motorcycle, it was based on the very modern looking Z900, and it does show. So if you come up close to the engine, you can see there's quite a lot of bits and pieces in there that's not very retro. There's a lot of cables in there hidden and tied away, bits and pieces in there that's just not as neat. You can't see through the engine like you can on the Triumph. Not that that matters. You've got clearly not a retro shock there. You've got a monoshock as opposed to the twin shocks of the Triumph. So yeah, I think things like that aren't quite so good on the Kawasaki, but overall, I mean, just look at that. It's beautiful, greatly helped by this SE having this brilliant yellow ball colour scheme, and the gold wheels look absolutely fantastic, and I think that exhaust pipe looks great as well, doesn't it? So yeah, really nice looking machine, but again, if we come up close, I mean, the paintwork is lovely, beautiful, lustrous. Look at this on here, really nicely done. So the paintwork is no different to the Triumph, maybe not quite so hard wearing as the Triumph. I've noticed this scratches quite easily, but fit and finish wise, I don't think it's quite as good as the Triumph. It's not bad, don't get me wrong, I just don't think it's quite as premium feeling as the Triumph is, and that might be because, as I say, this is based on another motorcycle to start with, whereas the Triumph was built ground up as a retro. But nonetheless, I think you'll agree, a really handsome motorcycle, and is you know, a large part of the reason why I bought it. I think it looks lovely. All right, so much for how these puppies ride and the comparison there. What are the lessons I've learned since I've owned these bikes? What are the sorts of things that you wouldn't necessarily pick up if you just did a test ride? Let's go through those now. Okay, so during the period I've owned these bikes, I've been making some notes about how they compare, because I know people are very interested in how these two bikes do compare. So these are the things I've listed, not in any particular order of importance, and some of these might be a little bit of a repeat of the stuff we did on the ride just now. So the first thing I noted here, actually we did talk about, I said gearbox. Not as smooth on this bike as it is on the Speed Twin, so we've covered that already, that's the first thing. Seating position on the Speed Twin, a little bit wristy compared to the position on the Z900 RS. Again, I'm kind of clutching at straws here, they're both very comfortable bikes, but this feels a little bit more sporty. Your legs are tucked up, you're lent a little bit further forward, but again, we're talking relatively here. These aren't sports bikes after all. The build quality, I think, on the Speed Twin just is that much better than on the Kawasaki. I'm not saying the Kawasaki is bad by any means. If you just had the Kawasaki, you'd be very happy with the build quality. But when you look at things like these plastic binnacles compared to these lovely metal ones on the Triumph, just the way that everything is designed as a retro bike on the Triumph as opposed to shoehorned into what was a modern bike on the Z900 RS. I just think Triumph have done a better job of quality and fit and finish overall, but I'm not saying the Kawasaki is bad by any means. Handling wise, there's no doubt the RS is the easier, more fun bike. Well, not necessarily more fun, it's an easier bike to ride. It feels much lighter, much more agile. I for one find it easier to ride. This one you have to put a bit more thought into. It is a little bit harder to corner, but it feels a lot more grunty and a bit more serious. So that's kind of how I describe that. Playful, fun, lightweight, this a bit more serious. I love the sound of both bikes, but the Speed Twin, as you heard, I hope, on the video, just burbles and pops a lot more than the Kawasaki does. It does it occasionally, this one does it all the time. It is probably because I've got the Vance & Hines pipes, but I have ridden Speed Twins with the standard pipes. They do it too, so I like the way that this bike sounds, probably a bit more than the Z900. But again, I'm not saying the Kawasaki doesn't sound nice. It sounds lovely, but it's a 4-cylinder induction box noise as opposed to a grunty, throbby British twin. Throttle jerkiness is something that comes up again and again in any comments that I make, or any videos rather I make about the Kawasaki. Everybody says, what about the jerky throttle? Well, I have to say, I've not found the throttle particularly jerky on the Kawasaki. When I bought the Speed Twin, it absolutely was, and I had to do various fixes. I've got a throttle spacer fitted in here. I've made a video about that. I'll put it in the corner if your bike suffers from that. I've got a booster plug fitted on here, which sorts out some of the fueling as well at low speeds, to try and sort that out. But I still find this bike, at low speed, the throttle is somewhat more jerky than it is on the Kawasaki. At low speed on the Kawasaki, I have no problem with the throttle fueling whatsoever. It rides beautifully, there's no jerkiness. The only thing I would say is if you're going around a corner, say, a big sweeping corner at a bit of speed with a little bit of throttle applied, if you then come off the throttle, you can feel a little bit of jerkiness on the throttle then on the Kawasaki. So if you're going to do a track day, which is an odd thing to do on these bikes, but if you're going to do that, then the Kawasaki may be a little bit unsettling in the corners if you come off the throttle. It's not a big issue, and I've had to really pay attention to it because so many people mentioned it. But so not an issue for me, but throttle if you're going to talk about throttle jerkiness, then the Speed Twin is more jerky than the Kawasaki. The Speed Twin feels heavier. I already mentioned this feels light and agile, but the Speed Twin actually feels quite a heavy bike when you're riding it. But in fact, is the lightest of all the Bonnevilles, so that's just an interesting fact. Now, although I've said that I think the build quality and the general look of the Speed Twin is done really, really nicely, I think overall I prefer the looks of the Kawasaki. It just looks a nicer bike. It might be the gold wheels that I always fall for, it might be the blingy yellow ball paint scheme, I don't know. But I think overall, as a design exercise, I think for me, the Kawasaki appeals to me more than the Speed Twin does. But that's as an overall thing, not on an individual detail level, as I've already covered. Oh, something for particularly people that are based in the UK and winter riders. I think the heated grips on the Speed Twin work much better than the ones on the Kawasaki. Number one, you can tell what power you've got them set them on easier because you've got an indication on the dash, whereas on this you have to count flashes on the handlebar. These also go a lot hotter than they do on the Kawasaki. So if heated grips are important to you, the Speed Twin's the one to have. And then the last thing I said here on my kind of lessons learnt is that the Speed Twin feels much faster from the off, much gruntier, but overall the Kawasaki feels the faster bike. And again, that's not unexpected with a twin versus a 4-cylinder. This is all about low down grunt, this is about top end power.
Alright, so there we go. That's my owner's comparison of the Speed Twin 1200 versus the Kawasaki Z900 RS. I hope you found that of some interest. Please do bear in mind, most of the things I've talked about are entirely subjective. I'm no expert on motorcycles. I have ridden a few, but I don't claim to be an expert in the intricacies of riding or the mechanics of them. These are just my feelings about the bikes. Make your own conclusions. Go and ride them both back to back if you can. That's the best way to do it. What I would say is both bikes are absolutely fantastic. If you buy either of them, you won't be disappointed. I love both of them. I've got a bit of a dilemma because on the surface of it, they're both retro style bikes. Do I need two of those in my garage? But in fact, I can't really decide which between them to keep. So all I'm going to do is keep hold of both of them for the next few months and probably years, and over time see which I ride more. But at the moment, I can't really say one is better than the other. They're just different. So go ride them, see what you think. All right, there we go. Hope you enjoyed that. If it's the first time you've been to the Missing and Fly, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. It'd be great to have it along next time. Until then, this has been the Missing and Fly. Cheerio.